I'm going to step back a little bit from what my introductory remarks were and what Bill has just told you, just to reflect on some issues that I think will help us understand how radical this moment is. Well, the first one is this image that I've put together. The point of it is that for the whole of human history, if we consider all the time that we as humans have been on the planet, it has only been a relatively short time in that history that alphabetical literacy and the text has become the dominant form of making meaning, and the dominant form in which we progress in life. It came with the invention of the printing press, of course. Before that, meaning making was multimodal. It was visual and audio and spatial and song and you name it. It had very different forms of making meaning. But the minute we got the printing press and the capacity to reproduce meaning making, you got a whole bunch of things that came with that. You got gatekeepers, you got canonical work, you got control, you got some people got to decide what was good text, and other people were left outside. We decided on disciplines in the university. There was a whole edifice that came with the invention of the printing press that produced the university, and later it produced mass schooling. It's what we know, and it's what we love, and what we think is precious is what we hang on to because it's part of our lives. However, if we are correct about the theoretical points that we put out in the work that we did with the New London group back then, the capacity to make meaning, right, technically, as Bill just said, with the same tools, with the same digital tools, you can produce alphabetical literacy, symbolic literacy, audio, visual, a whole range of other sensations too. And even little children can do that. You don't need all the technology and all the expertise that used to belong with each one of those modes because the digital technology allows us to make meaning and to circulate that meaning without the same regulators, without the same gatekeepers, without the same kind of hierarchy that the book and the printed page had created for us. So it's something to think about. Where are we now? What does the future require? How do we prepare learners to be citizens and learners and workers in a new age where the digital is available for entertainment, for all sorts of pleasures, for shopping, for politics, whatever domain you can think of, it has been affected by the affordances of the digital to make meaning, to reproduce meaning, to disseminate meaning. What does it mean for us in a university that's anchored in a traditional way of understanding knowledge, a traditional way of understanding meaning making, a traditional way of understanding what matters as learning, and what kind of transformations we're involved in into the future? So I want you to think about that. It's an important thing about ourselves and our willingness to reflect on what we're doing and our willingness to be open to the meaning-making tools that are available to us now, for better and for worse. Well, having said that, now this is a slightly old image from Cisco, which tracked, and this is in the school context, the difference between the usage of new technology in and out of formal education. And you can see here the dramatic difference, the use that young people make of digital means of connecting at breakfast time, at lunchtime, at dinner time when they're at home. I mean, it's just wide apart. And what is happening is that the everyday lives of our citizens, learners, and workers is becoming further and further distant from what we treasure as traditional education, whether it's kindergarten or schools or colleges or universities. There's a huge gap in the way in which we make meaning and understand the world and get information and solve problems. And I want us also to reflect on that trend, because although this is an old slide, the differences, the gaps have not shrunk in terms of the way in which formal education has sufficiently harnessed the opportunities that new technology allows us. I want to start by referring to Carl Weizmann. He's a physicist, a Nobel Prize winner, who loves what he does as a physicist, but he also is an educator. So he's had a long time reflecting on education in the area that he's in physics. And he said that in his domain, everything one needs to know to split an atom is manageable because it's known. But he said also that his work that he does in transforming learners to understand physics and to be scientists, that the contextual issues are so great and much, much greater than they are even in splitting an atom. So that's the challenge for us. I mean, that's our point about diversity. It's not just an issue of justice, but certainly it is about justice. It is an issue about equity. It is an issue about identity and agency. All those things are there. But our learners come to us, whether it's little children or people in university, coming from a world where they have far more agency and far more independence than our generation did. And that diversity of expression, orientation to the world, values, is having a bigger effect in any kind of environment where you need to collaborate or make decisions together or solve problems together. So diversity is critical. But what do we mean by it? We do not mean by it the traditional things of race, class, gender. I mean, you can take any group of people, women, and say, well, women are X. But in fact, there are more differences within that category called women than there are between the category called women and men, for example. So those gross demographics that we have so far used around ability, disability, race, gender, all those things that we try to either count, do we have enough of each, or try to address in some kind of way, are no longer useful to us. If we take diversity seriously, we have to address the life worlds that people bring in. And one person, 30 students, it's very hard for them to do that. Traditionally, because we had authoritative and authoritarian ways of dealing with learning, the 30 learners didn't matter. It didn't matter what they brought with them, because what they had to do is learn whatever the instructor wanted them to learn, and then they had to recite it, and then they had to remember it for a test at the end. Well, the learners that come to us now are not like that. And the people we need into the future, the complex future with huge human movement, huge challenges which are global as well as local, we're going to need to address the life world that each learner brings into the classroom, and then the life world of the classroom. What does it mean? How do we engage? What kind of pedagogy do we set in place that not only gets us to the substance of our subject matter, but also to how we engage and collaborate and transform each other in the process? So for us, diversity is not gross demographics. It's much larger than that, and it involves family background, your age, your language that you bring into it, what experiences you've had, the lists that you can see on this slide here. And in that case, in order to be able to address these issues, you do need a different way of organising the architecture of learning with collaborations between teachers and collaborations in spaces.
I'll just mention the media aspects of this issue of diversity. So here's a rough sketch of the history of communications over the last century and more. So what we had until perhaps the end of the 20th century is we had a phenomenon called the mass media. So, there was, if you lived in a city, there were perhaps 2 different newspapers every day. There were 4 or 5 television channels. They were owned by big conglomerates. There were specialists who spoke to us, they were called journalists. For example, in the case of news, or in the case of the encyclopedia, it was the universal knowledge written by experts. So what we had is this kind of environment which was called mass communications. The technologies were called mass media, and the outcome was mass culture, which was, Henry Ford said, any colour you like as long as it's black. So we lived in this world where if there were differences, we were overriding them with this kind of culture of uniformity, and the media was complicit in that. So what happens with the coming of digitisation, though, is a radical change. So now Facebook is one of the biggest companies on earth. Twitter is what Twitter is. Google is what Google is. And what people get in their media is highly differentiated. So your Facebook feed is a unique combination of the things that you're interested in, the people in your life. And what's interesting is not only is this highly differentiated, so you can now live in your own information, knowledge bubbles, if you like. You can live in your own little worlds. We're fragmenting instead of becoming a mass and like each other, homogenizing, which is what we did in the 20th century. In the 21st century, what's happening is we're becoming more different. We're living in these little differentiated worlds where in some ways it's a good thing, various ethnic identities, various gender identities, various cultural interests can, to some degree, flourish. But nevertheless, it's a radical change in the media environment. And if the old world of mass communication fitted with literacy in the singular, the new world that we're working with in our everyday lives is very much about diversity. Diversity not only as a principle, which is not being racist, not being sexist, not being homophobic, all these words that we use now to describe things which are antithetical to diversity. It's not just that, it's actually an environment where we're all the time having to live and work with that diversity, and in a sense, the media has made diversity an in-your-face, ever-present part of our everyday lives. So in a way, what we're also talking about is the fact that we're in this cultural environment where the old notions of literacy are becoming pretty anachronistic.